Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. Tonight's story is about the difference between a business and a legacy. A business is built with ledgers, strategy, and hard work. A legacy is built with sweat, sawdust, and soul. For years, I thought I was working to save my business, the one my father had passed down to me. I poured my life into it, working until my hands bled and my mind was a numb exhaustion, all to keep it from sinking. My wife, I thought, was my partner in this fight, the brilliant strategist managing the chaos while I battled in the trenches. I was wrong. I wasn't fighting to save our legacy. I was the unwitting fuel for a controlled demolition, and the woman I loved wasn't my partner. She was the saboteur, the architect of my ruin, patiently waiting to build her own empire on the ashes of my family's history. The business was called Blackwood and Sons Woodcraft. The name was a small, proud lie my father had invented. He was the only Blackwood and I was his only son. It wasn't a corporation. It was a cathedral of sawdust and dreams, a place where my father had turned raw timber into functional art. I grew up in that workshop. The smell of freshly cut oak and varnish is woven into the fabric of my earliest memories. When he passed, he didn't just leave me a business. He entrusted me with his life's work, his identity. I felt the weight of that legacy in every piece of wood I touched. My wife, Rhiannon, was the perfect partner for a man like me. I understood the grain of wood, the language of a chisel, the soul of a design. She understood the language of numbers, the cold, hard logic of a balance sheet. She had a background in business administration and a mind that could see patterns in financial data that, to me, were just a meaningless jumble. She joined the business not just as my wife, but as my partner, taking over the books, the client relations, the entire operational side of the company. She was the brain, I was the hands, and for a glorious decade we were a symphony. We grew the business, taking my father's small, artisanal workshop and turning it into a respected, high-end custom furniture company. Our life was good, built on a foundation of mutual respect and a shared dream. Or so I believed. The first sign of trouble was a slow, creeping rot. It wasn't a sudden crash, but a gradual erosion. A long-term client would be a little late on a payment. The cost of our premium materials would inch up. A new, flashy competitor called Apex Designs appeared on the scene, undercutting our prices with a slick, mass-produced aesthetic that somehow still managed to poach clients who should have known better. I saw these as challenges, as the normal headwinds of running a small business. I redoubled my efforts. My 60-hour weeks became 80-hour weeks. I started arriving at the workshop before sunrise and leaving long after the moon was high in the sky. I lived in a perpetual state of exhaustion, my hands raw and splintered, my clothes permanently dusted with a fine layer of sawdust. I was a soldier fighting a war of attrition, convinced that I could win through sheer force of will. Rhiannon was my general, my strategist, directing the battle from the home office. She was magnificent. She would show up at the workshop late at night with a hot meal and a thermos of coffee, her eyes full of a beautiful, sad pride. She would tell me how much she admired my dedication, how my father would have been so proud of my fight. She managed the angry phone calls from creditors, the threatening letters from suppliers. She would present me with carefully curated financial reports, showing me where we were bleeding, where we needed to cut. "We're in a tough spot, Gideon," she would say, her voice a perfect blend of concern and resolve. "But we're a team. You just focus on the craft, on getting these orders out. Let me handle the ugly stuff." And I did. I trusted her completely. I retreated into the sanctuary of the workshop, into the tangible reality of wood and tools, and I let her navigate the terrifying, abstract world of our impending financial collapse. The sacrifices mounted. We refinanced our home, pulling out every last cent of equity. I drained my personal savings, the small nest egg my father had left me. I stopped taking a salary, pouring every dollar of revenue back into the gaping maw of the business's expenses. My life became a monastic existence dedicated to a single, holy purpose, saving Blackwood and Sons. I was losing weight. My sleep was plagued by anxiety dreams of unpaid invoices and snapping saw blades. My friends stopped calling, tired of me always being too busy, too exhausted. My entire world had shrunk to the space between the workshop and our increasingly tense, quiet home. The first truly devastating blow came when we lost the Henderson account. It was a contract with a boutique hotel chain, our biggest and most prestigious client. They had been with us for years, a testament to the quality and reputation my father had built. Without them, our revenue was cut nearly in half overnight. The reason they gave was vague, something about restructuring their vendor relationships and moving in a new creative direction. It made no sense. I had just delivered a set of custom-built pieces for their new lobby, and the feedback had been glowing. I was heartbroken, but more than that, I was mystified. It felt like a betrayal that came out of nowhere. I sat in my small office at the back of the workshop, the termination letter in my trembling hand, and I finally felt the cold, hard reality of failure. It was over. I had failed my father. I had failed my family. I had failed myself. Rhiannon was there, of course. She held me as I broke down, her embrace a fortress against my despair. She told me it wasn't my fault, that the market was brutal, that we had fought a good fight. Her words were a balm, a comforting lie that I desperately needed to believe. She told me we would get through this together, that we still had each other. And as I clung to her, the smell of sawdust and failure clinging to my clothes, I believed her. I had no idea I was embracing my own saboteur, the architect of the very disaster that was crushing me. The loss of the Henderson account was not the end. It was the beginning of an acceleration. It was as if a dam had broken, and now the floodwaters were rising with a terrifying, unstoppable speed. What had been a slow bleed was now a hemorrhage. Creditors who had once been patient were now demanding immediate payment. Suppliers who had extended us credit for years were now demanding cash on delivery. Every day was a fresh new hell of angry phone calls and red-stamped letters. My life became a desperate, frantic scramble to plug holes in a sinking ship, using my own blood and sweat as sealant. I was forced to do the unthinkable. I went to my mother. She was a retiree, living on a fixed income and the small inheritance my father had left her. Asking her for money was the deepest humiliation I had ever known. But Rhiannon had presented me with the numbers. A stark, brutal spreadsheet that showed we were days away from having the workshop doors padlocked by the bank. She had framed it as our last, only hope. My mother, bless her trusting heart, gave me her life savings, every last penny, believing it was a temporary loan to save her late husband's legacy. The guilt of it was a physical sickness, a constant, sour taste in the back of my throat. I poured the money into the business, and for a glorious, fleeting week, the calls stopped. We paid our most aggressive creditors. I was able to buy a shipment of the rare Brazilian rosewood needed for a high-end commission, a job that I believed could be the start of our comeback. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope, and then the shipment of rosewood was lost. A logistical nightmare, the shipping company claimed. A paperwork error, a misrouted container. It was gone. The insurance claim would take months if it ever paid out at all. The client was furious. We lost the commission. The money from my mother, the money that was supposed to be our salvation, had vanished into thin air. I was back at square one, but now I was not just a failure. I was a man who had squandered his own mother's security. My despair was so profound it was a physical weight. I started to have trouble breathing in the workshop, the air thick with the ghosts of my failures. It was during this period of near-total collapse that I stumbled upon the first loose thread in the tapestry of Rhiannon's deception. I was in the office late one night, searching desperately for an old invoice, a piece of paper I thought I could use to challenge a supplier's claim. I was digging through a filing cabinet that Rhiannon usually kept meticulously organized, but this drawer was a mess, stuffed with old, paid bills from years ago. In the back, tucked into a folder for a long-closed utility account, I found a series of invoices I didn't recognize. They were from a company called Strategic Logistics Consulting. They were for tens of thousands of dollars, paid out over the last 18 months. I had never heard of this company. I had never approved these payments. In our desperate financial state, the idea of spending a fortune on consulting was ludicrous. A cold, prickling unease began to creep up my spine. I took pictures of the invoices with my phone and put the folder back exactly where I had found it. The next morning, I approached her. I tried to be casual, to frame it as a simple question. "Hey, I was looking for an old bill and found some payments to a logistics consultant. I don't remember talking about that." Her reaction was a masterclass in manipulation. She didn't get defensive. She looked at me with a deep, weary sadness. "Oh, Gideon," she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "That was me. I was trying to be proactive. I thought maybe a fresh set of eyes could help us find efficiencies in our supply chain. It was a failure. It led to nothing. I was so ashamed to have wasted the money that I didn't want to burden you with another problem. I'm so sorry." It was the perfect explanation. It was plausible. It played on my own sense of guilt for being too overwhelmed to notice. It framed her secrecy as an act of love, of trying to protect me. I felt a wave of shame for my suspicion. Here she was, trying everything to save us, and I was questioning her. I apologized and I let it go. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it refused to die. A few weeks later, I was on a design blog looking for inspiration, a desperate attempt to feel like a craftsman again and not just a failing businessman. I saw an article featuring our competitor, Apex Designs. It was a glowing profile of their new flagship product line. As I scrolled through the slick professional photos, my blood ran cold. The feature piece, a stunning minimalist dining table, was made from Brazilian rosewood. The grain pattern, the specific color, the unique figuring of the wood, it was unmistakable. It was my rosewood, the shipment that had been lost. The odds of them sourcing the exact same rare, expensive timber at the exact same time were astronomical. It wasn't a coincidence. It was an impossibility. That night, my secret investigation began in earnest. I was no longer a trusting husband. I was a man hunting for the truth in the ruins of his own life. I waited until she was sound asleep, then I went to her laptop. Her password, ironically, was Legacy 1985. I started with her email. I searched for strategic logistics consulting. I found the email chain. The consultant wasn't a logistics expert. He was a private investigator. And the service he had been hired for was not to find efficiencies. It was to conduct a full asset search on me, my mother, and the business itself. She had been mapping out our total financial picture, identifying every last dollar she could squeeze from us. But that wasn't the worst of it. I kept digging, driven by a cold, methodical fury. I found a hidden folder in her cloud storage, protected by a simple password, the name of our biggest competitor, Apex. Inside was not just one file, but hundreds. It was a complete digital mirror of our business, copies of my proprietary designs. Our full client list, complete with contact information and order histories, detailed breakdowns of our pricing structure and material costs, and then the final devastating piece of the puzzle, a series of email drafts unsent but saved to a man named Liam at Apex Designs. The emails were a timeline of her sabotage. "The Henderson termination is confirmed. They'll be in touch next week. The rosewood shipment has been successfully rerouted to your warehouse. The paperwork is being handled. Gideon is taking a loan from his mother. This should give us the final cash infusion we need before we initiate the final stage." The screen blurred. The air in the room grew thin. The low, buzzing sound of the computer's fan was the only thing I could hear. She hadn't just been watching the business burn. She had been pouring gasoline on the fire, all while holding my hand and telling me how brave I was for trying to put it out. The betrayal was so total, so profoundly evil, it was almost beyond comprehension. The woman I loved, the partner I trusted with my father's legacy, had not been my partner at all. She had been the enemy, and she had been winning a war I didn't even know I was fighting. The moment of confrontation was not a storm, it was an earthquake. It was the violent, sickening shearing of the very bedrock of my reality. I didn't wait for morning. I walked into our bedroom, the laptop in my hand, its screen glowing with the evidence of her treachery, and I turned on the light. She blinked awake, her face soft with sleep, the picture of innocence. And in that moment, the dissonance between the woman I saw and the monster I now knew her to be filled me with a rage so pure and so cold it felt like ice in my veins. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply set the laptop down on the bed in front of her, opened to the last email draft she had written to her partner at Apex. "The final stage is ready," it read. "He's broken. It's time to make the offer." She read the words, and the soft, sleepy innocence on her face vanished, replaced by a mask of cold, hard calculation. There was no flicker of shock, no shame, no remorse. It was the look of a chess player whose queen had just been unexpectedly captured. She was not horrified by her actions. She was annoyed that she had been caught. "So you found it," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I suppose I underestimated you. I didn't think you had it in you to be suspicious." Her words were a chilling confession, an admission that she had been banking on my trust, on my love, as a central part of her strategy. My devotion had been a tool, a vulnerability she had expertly exploited. "All of it, Rhiannon?" I asked, my own voice a hoarse whisper. "The 80-hour weeks, my mother's money, the lost clients, my father's legacy, all of it was just a game to you." And then came the justification. It was not a tearful confession, but a cold, condescending lecture, a final, brutal twisting of the knife. "It wasn't a game, Gideon," she said, her voice taking on a tone of patronizing pity. "It was a mercy killing. This business, this dusty, sentimental monument to your father, was an anchor around our necks. It was dying. The market changed. Your father's way of doing things became obsolete. I saw it years ago. You were too blinded by nostalgia, too busy playing the dutiful son to see the truth." She swung her legs out of bed and began to pace the room, not like a cornered animal, but like a CEO delivering a harsh but necessary business presentation. "You wanted to go down with the ship," she continued. "I chose to build a lifeboat. I saw a way to salvage something from the wreckage. A way to give us a real future, a future not dictated by the ghost of your father. A future built on lies," I choked out. "A future built by destroying my family, by stealing from my own mother." "Your mother's money was an investment," she shot back, her voice sharp. "It was capital. In a few years, when our new venture was successful, I would have paid her back with interest. You see things in terms of emotion and sentiment. I see them in terms of assets and liabilities. Blackwood and Sons was a liability. I converted it into an asset. The new venture, the lifeboat, I finally understood. This wasn't just about sabotaging my company, it was about acquiring it. Apex," I said, the name tasting like poison. "Liam, you weren't just feeding them information, you were my replacement." She had the audacity to smile, a small, triumphant smirk. "Liam is a businessman. He sees the potential. He understands that the real value in Blackwood and Sons wasn't the name or the history. It was the machinery, the workshop, the physical assets. Our plan was simple. We run the company into the ground, drive it into bankruptcy. Then at the auction, Liam and I, as a new corporate entity, buy the assets for pennies on the dollar. We get the workshop, the tools, the infrastructure, all free and clear of the debt you so foolishly racked up. We relaunch as a new, leaner, more modern company, and you get to walk away with your precious memories." The sheer, sociopathic elegance of the plan was staggering. She hadn't just cheated on me in a business sense. She had designed a strategy to erase me from my own life, to steal my past and sell it back to herself at a discount. She had used my love, my work ethic, my devotion to my father's memory as the engine of her own ambition. Every ounce of sweat I had poured into the workshop floor had been to polish the assets for their eventual acquisition. My struggle had not been a fight to save the business. It had been the unpaid labor of its demolition. I looked at the woman standing in front of me, a stranger in the familiar shape of my wife, and I felt nothing. The love, the anger, the heartbreak, it all collapsed into a vast, empty void. I had been married to a corporation, a hostile entity that had just executed a successful takeover of my entire life. "Get out," I said, my voice flat and dead. "Get out of my house." "It's not your house anymore, Gideon," she said coolly, already moving towards the closet, her mind on the logistics of her departure. "It's the bank's house. It's a liability just like you. I watched as she packed a bag with a calm, efficient detachment, as if she were leaving for a business trip. There were no tears, no final words of regret. There was only the quiet, chilling reality of her absolute, remorseless betrayal. I had lost my business. I had lost my home. I had lost my father's legacy. But the most profound loss was the 17 years I had spent loving a woman who had looked at my soul and seen only a balance sheet. The earthquake was over, and I was left standing alone in the rubble. The weeks that followed her departure were a masterclass in hitting rock bottom. Her final words, "It's the bank's house," were not a parting shot, they were a statement of fact. The bankruptcy I had fought so desperately to avoid was no longer a threat, it was an inevitability. The meticulously orchestrated sabotage had worked perfectly. The company was insolvent, a hollowed-out carcass of debt and broken contracts. I was personally liable for most of it. The second mortgage on the house, the loan from my mother, the massive lines of credit with suppliers, it was all tied to me. I was ruined, professionally and personally. I spent my days in a daze, fielding calls from lawyers and bankruptcy trustees, the language of liquidation a constant, droning soundtrack to my despair. At night, I would walk the silent, cavernous space of the workshop, the tools and machinery standing like tombstones in a graveyard. I would run my hands over the cool, scarred surface of my father's workbench, the place where he had taught me to love the craft, and I would feel nothing but a profound, crushing emptiness. The legacy was dead. The dream was over. The story of Blackwood and Sons was ending with a final, humiliating chapter written in legal documents and auction notices. I was on the verge of losing everything, of simply handing the keys to the receiver and walking away, a ghost haunted by the smell of sawdust. The turning point came from a place I didn't expect. I was clearing out my father's old office, a small, dusty room I had rarely entered, packing his books and papers into boxes for storage. In the back of a drawer beneath a stack of old ledgers, I found a small, leather-bound sketchbook. It was his first one from when he was just starting out. I sat on the floor and flipped through the pages. They were filled with his early designs, not for furniture but for small, intricate, beautiful things. Hand-carved wooden toys, elaborate puzzle boxes, a series of stunningly detailed bird sculptures. I saw his passion, his pure, unadulterated love for the wood itself, for the simple act of creation, before the pressures of running a business had complicated everything. In the inside cover, in his familiar, strong handwriting, was a single sentence. "It's not about what you make, it's about what you make it for." And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I had been fighting to save the business, the corporate entity, the name on the sign. I had been so focused on what I was making, the company, the revenue, the legacy, that I had forgotten what I was making it for. I was doing it for him, for his memory, but also for the simple, profound joy of the craft itself. The business was a liability, just as Rhiannon had said, but the craft, the soul of the place, that was an asset, and it was an asset she could never touch. A new plan began to form in my mind, a strategy born not of desperation, but of a strange, liberating clarity. I stopped fighting the bankruptcy. I embraced it. I met with the trustee and told them I would cooperate fully. I spent the next few weeks meticulously documenting Rhiannon's sabotage. I gathered the invoices from the fake consulting firm, the printouts of her emails and secret files, the shipping records for the lost rosewood that traced directly to the Apex warehouse. I had an airtight case for corporate espionage and fraud. The day of the bankruptcy auction arrived. The workshop was filled with strangers, vultures picking over the bones of my life's work. And in the front row, looking smug and triumphant, were Rhiannon and her partner Liam. They were the primary bidders, ready to scoop up their prize for pennies on the dollar. Just before the bidding was set to begin, I approached them, my lawyer by my side. I didn't speak to them. I had my lawyer hand them a single, thick folder. Inside was a copy of all my evidence and a draft of a civil lawsuit that would not only accuse them of fraud but would name every client they had stolen, every supplier they had conspired with. It was a weapon of mutually assured destruction. "Here's the offer," my lawyer said, his voice cold and flat. "You are going to let every single lot in this auction go, except for one. You will bid on and win Lot 7B, the corporate assets of Blackwood and Sons, which includes the company name, the client lists, all outstanding receivables, and all outstanding debts. You will pay the assessed value for it. In exchange for this, the lawsuit goes away. My client will not pursue a claim against you. He will walk away." They stared at him, then at me, their faces a mask of disbelief and fury. They were trapped. A public lawsuit would destroy them before they even began. It would expose their methods to the entire industry. They would be pariahs. They had no choice. I watched as the auction proceeded. They sat there, silent and seething, as I, through a proxy bidder funded by a small, final loan from a sympathetic old friend, bought back every single piece of machinery, every workbench, every hand tool. My father's legacy. Then at the end, the auctioneer announced Lot 7B. Rhiannon and Liam made a single, grudging bid. "Sold," the auctioneer said. They had won. They were now the proud owners of a bankrupt company name, a list of clients who now knew they were thieves, and a mountain of crippling debt. They had bought the poison pill I had so carefully prepared for them. I was left with a workshop, a set of tools, and my freedom. The next day I took a pry bar and I pulled the old, weather-beaten sign from the front of the building. I let the pieces of Blackwood and Sons woodcraft fall to the ground and shatter. The business was dead, but the craft was alive. I started over not as a company but as a single craftsman in a workshop. I didn't make custom furniture for hotels anymore. I made the things from my father's old sketchbook. I made puzzle boxes. I carved birds. I created things not for profit but for the love of the work. I found a new, quieter, more profound success. My life is smaller now, but it is my own. I learned the hardest lesson a person can learn. Sometimes, the thing you are fighting to save is the very thing that is imprisoning you. I had to lose my legacy to find my purpose, and I had to let the business die to save its soul. Thank you for tuning in to Reddit Whispers. We've all faced moments when everything felt broken. What was your turning point? Leave it in the comments because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now.